All right, another morning reflection, driving in the sun, so some good thoughts on Bitcoin, I hope. I shared this week on Twitter. I am writing an article which I want to title How Bitcoin is the Standard Measurement for Human Productivity. And yeah, I just wanted to talk a bit about that, because last week I saw Michael Saylor's presentation. Would recommend it to anyone. There is no second best. Where he said, the illustration of Bitcoin as digital gold is nice because, it gives people something to visualize it, but it doesn't do justice to Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the invention of provable, finite digital scarcity. It is scarcity. It is. There's nothing like it. You cannot compare it to gold. You can only compare it to one thing that is scarce in our life, and that is time. Because we all don't know how much time we have. If you have money, you cannot buy more time. There's no marketplace for time. And so if Bitcoin is like time, what does that look like in practice? So I just said human productivity, right? In my last video, I talked about what if I build a shed in someone's backyard. I'm gonna keep with that example. Human productivity is energy expended within a certain amount of time. It's finite energy expended in a finite amount of time. Okay. So if I build a shed and expend finite energy in a finite amount of time, and use also materials like wood that basically captured energy from the sun in the tree that the beams for the shed came from, right? Everything around you costs energy to create or maintain. If I create a shed and expend my energy, my finite energy in a finite amount of time, how do we reward that currently? We reward that with something that can be created infinitely. Fiat money. That doesn't really sound like a good exchange, does it? It's not a good value exchange. So I expend something finite and I get something in return that can infinitely be created. That's not a smart, rational thing to do. Okay, so what does the value exchange look like? So let's say I'm a shed builder, and I come to you and you say, I want you to build a shed in my garden. And I say, okay, that's fine. I can build that for 1,000 units of your fiat money currency, your fiat currency. Then you say, no, I want to do it for can't you do it for 850 or 900? I said, no, well, I can do it for 950, okay. 950. And at the moment we shake hands, our exchange is equal. We were free to discuss what the value was represented in the amount of units of the fiat currency at the moment that we were discussing this, right? I have my value proposition and a price, just as in any store or on any website or whatever, right? Someone presents the amount of units of the fiat currency you need to pay, and you can agree to that or not. But there's something interesting going on, right? Currently, when we have that value exchange of two free people that agree and shake hands on doing a value exchange, which is the reward that is used by you to pay me is influenced by a third party. A third party is influencing our freely debated, freely discussed exchange, because the money that we use for it is influenced by a third party, or third parties, banks, governments, central banks. And so is it actually an equal exchange? It felt equal, right? Because we discussed and we ended up with 950. But let's say I get to work, right? I get to work, I build the shed, I expend my finite energy in a finite amount of time, and you pay me, and then I leave. And then I have that fiat money, but we all know that the fiat money will devalue, will be devalued, right? The model says 2% a year. In reality, it's obviously way more. So now I'm stuck with a reward and I cannot get back my time and my energy. So I'm incentivized to spend my reward quicker than I maybe wanted to, right? I have a high time preference, like Safe Dynamus explains. While maybe I am building these sheds because I eventually want to build a house for myself. So I need to save the rewards that I get from building the sheds in people's backyards. So how do we get to Bitcoin, right? How do we create a standard measurement for human productivity? So we talked about the reward side. The reward side of this value exchange is influenced by third party. It's infinitely created and therefore it devalues over time, even during and after shaking hands. But for the example, let's keep it after the transaction is done. So how can we create a value exchange where both the offer, the limited amount of energy expended in a limited amount of time, is also rewarded with something that is limited, scarce, finite, however you want to call it? How can we reward it with something that is of similar value? And again, as Michael Saylor said, the only thing you can compare time to is Bitcoin. Because Bitcoin does not get infinitely created. There is a set amount of Bitcoin. And how do you know that there will never be more created? Because it is protected by the strongest computer network in the world. The rules of this monetary system are enforced by the strongest computer system in the world. And the energy that's been used to create it, or still the energy used to mine new Bitcoin, is the equivalent of 20 full-on nuclear reactors. That's the energy you need to centralize in one place to kill Bitcoin, which is never going to happen because the incentives are not there to do that. That's why Bitcoin will never stop. Okay, so if Bitcoin can only be compared to time, it makes sense to create a new equation for a value exchange where on one side you have time / energy expended in time, let's say, versus Bitcoin. Then at any moment we can still discuss how many Bitcoin or parts of a Bitcoin someone is going to pay me for building a shed, right? That's still the free market. But I know that the reward will keep its value and not be devalued because more units will be created. So that way, Bitcoin can be a measurement for human productivity, for what we do, what you do, what I do, why I'm now on my way to expend my energy in the next 9 hours doing something, right? If you can measure that and you know that the measurement is correct and that the reward that you will receive for whatever you do will always stay pure, then you can actually start figuring out what would I actually want to be rewarded for. And I think that's a very interesting side effect of Bitcoin or hyper-Bitcoinization. If your reward is just, you will do just work, you will put in the work, you will deliver value, right? Because when everyone understands that you're expending your finite energy in a finite amount of time for a reward that can infinitely be created, why would you add value? This is why we have ugly things. This is why we have, I saw a meme, like an ugly water fountain in a city instead of like those fountains in Rome, right? You are not incentivized to add value if your reward can be created by a third party infinitely. You know, it's just not rational. So if we measure Bitcoin, if we use Bitcoin as a measurement for human productivity, what does that look like? How can we visualize that? There's also in the presentation of Saylor, so again, please check it out. There is no second best. He visualizes Bitcoin as a big cube I don't know the exact numbers, but it's like 270 blocks by 270 blocks by 270 blocks, right? Like a 3D cube. And this cube represents the 21 million Bitcoin that can all also be divided by 100 million. And they are created with real energy. Real energy was used to create that block. And it's still being created, right? Because new Bitcoins are still mined, but we are making that big block. And kind of how I visualize it is that all the lines that make up the blocks, right? Like the outer lines, they are filled with energy. The energy that's been used to create them, right? And on top of this block, I see like a tornado, like a vortex going down. And if we use Bitcoin as a standard measurement for human productivity, all the human productivity will go through the vortex, and it will be captured in this 3D cube that are all the Bitcoins in the world. And then Bitcoin becomes like the ruler, you know, the 1 meter long ruler, or like time, that all the human productivity that is ever expended by all the people in the world will be captured in something that is unbreakable. And that will give value to Bitcoin as a standard measurement for human productivity. And the human productivity will not only be captured in the things that they create or deliver, right? Like the shed that I built in the backyard. But it will also be preserved in the Bitcoin that it's rewarded with. Let me know if that makes sense. Still working on it. And I'm gonna write this out. So let me know.